Hello and welcome to Don't Shout at the Telly with me, your host, Saliha Ali. We're delighted to have with us today David Perks, who is the Head of Physics at Graveney School in South London. David is also in the process of setting up a state-of-the-art science-free school in East London, and he's going to talk to us a little bit today about why he's doing that. David, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, sure. There are three things I kind of want to introduce to you about why I'm taking the sort of bold step of trying to set up a free school in East London. One is I've been a teacher for 25 years in the state sector, and my experience all the way through that in every school I've taught at is that we have, if you like, low expectations of what children are capable of doing, and not only that, teachers as well. And I started off and I asked myself as a teacher, I was only in my early 20s, can you make a difference? That's why I went into it. And yes, you can. And when I started off, I went to Newcastle upon Tyne, in the sort of back end of the shipyards industry, quite a rough area. And I know that you can make a difference, because I did for one or two kids there. But that's not the same thing as changing the education system for the better. That's kind of like patching it up, in a sense. And in fact, the system mitigates your ability to do that. And the low expectations culture is everywhere around in the system, and it's very hard to sustain yourself against that. The other thing that I've been doing for the past 10 years or so is campaigning to defend academic science education being taught in the state system, which sounds silly, teaching science academically in schools. Why would you need to defend that? But that's the bizarre situation we're in, is that low expectations has become such a rife sort of problem that the idea that you could teach somebody science academically, you're seen as morally wrong for trying to do it, because you're denying kids access to something they can do if you're trying to do something that's too hard for them to do. And so therefore, the drift away from teaching academic science has become a kind of avalanche recently, so that there's very few places left where that is still going on in any credible sense. Put those two things together. When the opportunity to set up a free school came about, I couldn't resist the temptation to try and do it the way I want to do it, and the way I've been trying to do it for 25 years, but not just to one or two kids, but to a whole school, and try and see if we can make a real difference.
What parents do you think would prefer to send their children to a free school rather than a normal comprehensive?
We, to get this far in the stage that we're at in the process, have to gather evidence that there is demand for the school as a formal part of the application process. And what that has meant for us is going out on the streets. And so as a team, we've gone out on the streets and collected the evidence by meeting people and asking them, would they support the school? And very, very few are hostile. Maybe about 5 or 6 out of these 500 plus that we've signed on our sheets, and maybe 1,000, 2,000 that we've met, 5 or 6 negative conversations. Because what people want is a good education, and they don't actually care what you call it. What they want is a good, sound education. So if you offer that, they're interested straight away.
What worries me slightly about that is that we shouldn't need an alternative. We should surely just be making what we already have better.
The one thing I would say is that if we think that the state system has not worked, then this is an experiment which at least provides the opportunity to see other examples of an education system that may actually work. Some may not. But without experimentation, you're stuck.
So it allows for the experimentation where it wouldn't otherwise be.
Absolutely. I mean, that is the point that where I completely agree, as it happens, with Michael Gove on that, right? Because I think the previous system was monolithic, oppressive in the sense that you had to do it the way that they said you had to do it, and that's it. And anything outside of that wasn't countenanced. And therefore, to break out of that is to open the door to say, well, we could do it differently.
But Dave, when you say you're trying to change the education system, for me it seems that statistics of people who go to these schools and people who set up these schools are almost exclusively middle-class people. And then what is that doing for equality? Are you not changing education for a privileged sect of society?
Well, if that were the case, that would be a bit wrong. Now, I do not speak for the free school movement or any other free school. I absolutely do not. But you have to take, it's a bit odd to say this, but you have to take Michael Gove on his own word on this. And if it was one thing he's done, is he's made it very difficult to argue that that's what they're doing, because the whole system is geared to the opposite. It's geared to fitting in with the social mobility agenda, which is saying that, you know, we definitely want to educate working class kids and give them the opportunities that people that pay get anyway. And in my sense, we thought long and hard about this. How do we do that without, you know, sort of going one way or the other? We don't want to bend completely down the social mobility route, but we don't want to set up a middle class enclave in a working class area. So we're admissions criteria, our admissions criteria is line of sight, distance from the door, in effect. And so that cuts out the possibility that there is any sort of bias to one section of the community or another, as long as, you know, we don't stick it in the weirdest place in East London, which I don't think exists. But, you know, so we're looking basically bang in the middle of Hackney, Newham, Tower Hamlets. I'll let you imagine where that might be. And therefore, you know, we know we're going to hit those communities that need an education. And we have gone out to canvass in just those places. If you know it, we went to Watney Road Market, which is not really a market and it's not a very nice place, but we canvassed parents there because that's where we wanted to get them interested in it.
I think the whole question of asking which kind of parents are going to send their children to free schools generally, though, does raise a question about parenting as well, and the fact that there's some kind of built-in privilege when children have parents who are going to take a more active role in their children's education. And do you think the idea that maybe a new kind of school will fix the problems takes a little bit of the responsibility away from parents?
I'm also wondering, on the similar note, I mean, given that we've had schools in the areas that you described, like Coopers and Haberdashers, and they've eventually become elitist schools, how do we know that you're not just setting up an elite school for the future?
I wanted to go back more towards what you're talking about, having an academic science school. How do you think that a child at the age of 10, or parents who have a child at the age of 10, would want to send their child to a school that sort of is very specific in that sense? Do you think they'll be ready to make that decision?
Do you think that free schools with high academic standards will force other comprehensives to raise their standards, or will it result in falling standards, losing students and funding from other comprehensives of the area?
I think that last point is very pertinent to this discussion this week in the news, has really hit on that. Is setting up a free school in your local area going to wipe out the local comprehensive school or make it better? And I'll be blunt on this. All right? If the local comprehensive school can't do it, it shouldn't exist. Okay, it's got to change for the better, or get out of the game. And the problem is that at the moment, the way it works is because the schools are so similar in their outlook, it's hidden. Right? So there is one kind of measure that the government now has introduced over 2 years, is the English baccalaureate, which is basically 5 good GCSEs at 16. And as a measure, it tells you immediately if kids are being taught 5 good GCSEs. And if you look at the figures in East London, it's appalling. And you know, there are different reasons for it. One of them is that languages are just not taught. Right? Another is that science, when it is taught, it's hidden whether it's taught well or not, because even the English baccalaureate doesn't tell you whether it's academically taught. And so, you know, just as a really straightforward standard, we can't meet that. Why not? Because there's been a collapse in expectation. So it might have been done in the past, but it's not being done now, because what's being done now is get 5 GCSEs or equivalents at the standard, but that means substandard qualifications that are dressed up as GCSEs. And I'm absolutely adamant that that is not what we're going to do. So we're setting ourselves up, you know, to either do really, really well or fail, right? Because we're either going to get all our children through the English baccalaureate, or we're not. And if we, we said in the first cohort we'd aim for 50%. Well, the highest in the state sector at the moment is around about 38%. Right? So, you know, if we do it, we're going to do something really positive, even though it's not what we want in the end. We want to do even better than that. The elitist thing, I'm sorry, but we are elitist because we believe that knowing something is better than not knowing something. So in that sense, we're elitist. We're not elitist in the social sense, right? But in terms of academic knowledge, absolutely right. So we want children to know what we think is valuable. And you can call that elitist or not. That's just the way it is. And the parents thing is interesting, very interesting in terms of are we making up for a parental deficit? I think was the way you phrased it. I may be getting it the wrong way around. But what we're trying to do is say that the school should educate the pupils and that we should not expect the parents to do it. Because why should we? In other words, if we're not doing our job, they can't do theirs. And so there's a thing at the moment where a lot of middle-class parents take on a huge amount of educational work and they're being told to do so to some extent. But what we would say is that we want to do that ourselves and do it the way we want to do it and not have to rely on parents at all, which actually helps if you come from a family where that's not very easy to do for you, then we're going to do it for you. So one way we want to do that is homework, we're going to say is prep. You do it in this building, basically. You don't do it at home. And cut that out, which allows us to do what we want to do successfully and that everybody gets access to it and there isn't that division between those who get the help at home and those who don't.
The thing is, you're just setting up one school. How much of a difference can one school make? Because it's not, and again, what if, imagine your system is actually pretty good and better than the state one. Everybody wants to go to your school. You can't take everybody. So the other people have to go to state school, and it's just, do you know what I mean? It's just, let's say, unfair in a sense, because you want to make a change and you're not offering it to everybody.
I think that's a fair enough point, yeah. But if we're good, then maybe we'll get another one. If we're successful, then we are the model that people must aspire to. That's got to be the way it's done. And that's the thing about the free school setup, is that good ones will shine, bad ones will shut. Yeah.
Then why not you trying to change the state system and just getting rid of that and just doing your own thing? Have you actually tried to do something to change how the state schools work?
Okay, to do it very simply. Okay, I've been working in the state system, as I say, for 25 years. We've been campaigning in various forms with friends of mine in various guises about just that, right? We had a mini manifesto in the last election and so on. And actually, those ideas have begun to be picked up a bit, right? So the current government, whatever you think of them, have picked up some of our ideas, especially on the curriculum. And that is making an impact. But the vast majority of the educational establishment have bought into a completely different way of looking at things and are very, very resistant to it. So it's an argument you've got to win. And the best way I can make that argument is to do a positive example that proves that we can do it. And in that respect, that is part of the argument. So it's a kind of positive model of what we should be able to achieve. And I'm telling you now that people will not like it if it works. And it will be an argument, massive one.
I mean, creating new schools, doesn't that just reduce funding for other schools in the area, though?
If you extend the school hours and have prep, as you mentioned, won't this take up more funds than comprehensive schools?
The question about will it not take away funding from state schools, what's going to happen to state schools, I think that kind of sanctifies state schools in a very empty way. I think Dave is absolutely right when he says, well, if they're not, playing up to the game, then they need to leave the game and leave it to schools and whatever are doing it really, really well. And that should be a model for the sort of the standard of education that we want to give our kids, and that's what should prevail. And I think, a lot of discussion has been going on around not just free schools, but also around private schools, the kind of fairness discussion. And I sort of wonder, like, in how I've seen that discussion come about is that it's not, it's not fair, therefore we should lower the standards of education. And I think that there's something underneath that's going on in terms of, as a society, our perception of what it means to educate our children in the first place, that, it's instrumentalised, it's used for purposes of social engineering, so to make us, little anti-racist and teach us how to be, rather than actually teaching us knowledge and things. And, like with Dave's science school, like when I was at school, for example, I went to a school in East London, not a great school, whatever, and there was a predominantly, Asian kids there. So one of the things there was that, oh right, these kids are not going to be interested in learning European languages. So, you know, we got languages like Urdu, Bengali, Arabic, stuff like that, and it's kind of like, hang on a minute, you know, first of all, from a very young age, it kind of makes an assumption just through a random idea of your background, what your interests are going to be, you know, and there's this thing about let's make everything relevant to the student. Let's make everything relevant to their interests, everything relevant to what they're likely to grow up and be, you know. So because, you know, if I go to a school in East London, I probably won't grow up to be a really amazing engineer, you know. So we'll do business studies for you. We're not going to teach you classics, you know. The idea that you'd get classics or Latin in an East London school is just diabolical because, oh yeah, those students are not going to be interested. And I think with the science thing, I think one of the things that's happened with science, because it's hard, it's difficult, and it's, you know, not necessarily relevant to every kid's interest in the country, I feel like the solution or conclusion has been to sort of go, oh, we'll teach it at a lower level or stop teaching it at this kind of intensity or detail. Why not, you know, instead, why not sort of go up rather than go down?
Yeah, and I was just wondering if you could maybe talk about the influence of private organisations within these schools, because I think it's a good idea about free schools. I'm concerned that maybe private organisations will have too much of an influence within the educational structure.
I'm just wondering really what more the school will have to offer compared to, say, a school that is a comprehensive and therefore doesn't focus on one particular subject but has specialist science status and so may have better facilities and maybe better teachers in that area, but that will, you know, focus on that area as well.
On the question about money that just pinged across the room a couple of times, I wish there was a large pot of money that we had, but we're funded on pretty much exactly the same basis as any academy, per pupil funding. I know that because I've been doing the budget for it, and we have to make it work. But the choice is that we decide how we spend it. That's the difference. Okay, so if we want to spend it on more on teachers than more on equipment, then that's up to us, and that's what we're trying to do. So we're going to spend it on subject specialist teaching. That's the main thing that we're keen to do, and cut back wherever we need to make that run. On the specialist science status, and do we teach anything else? I must make this clear. We teach everything else, okay? But what we insist on is that every child gets physics, chemistry and biology, separate science teachers to do it, specialists, from year 7 to year 11 throughout their compulsory science education. So they have a footing for then to go further forward. So at post-16, we'll be delivering, yes, more science than anything else beyond the post-16, because that's where our specialism is. But below that, we will have classics, we will have history, we'll have modern foreign languages, because we're going to deliver the English baccalaureate. And we insist that we're going to do that. But we will do it through subject specialist teachers who have a passion for their subject. And hopefully, then some of them will want to study history, etc., beyond post-16. And that's great. And if we have the capacity to deliver that for them, we will. So on that basis, it's kind of like taking the education seriously. That's the point about that. And allowing the youngsters to develop the passion for the subject. If it is modern foreign languages, don't care what your background is, you do it. And that's the way we're approaching it. On the private organisations, that is a good point. Because you could make, you know, I'm devil's advocate for what I'm doing, right? You could make the case that what is actually happening is you're transferring schools from the state system to private organisations through parents who effectively can't run a school, so they get a private organisation to run it for them. And that is literally happening on in several cases. And that, you know, if you look at it as a system, then that is a problematic thing. Yet you must be clear that they're not doing it on a profit run basis at the moment. Some people are arguing they should, some people are arguing they shouldn't. I personally think that if they do it on a profit run basis, then it's going to completely be a mess. Okay, and it'll be a real mistake. We're not doing that because we're going to run it ourselves, and we're going to learn very quickly how to do that. We'll buy in support and so on to do that from people who we trust. But the core thing for us is the vision that we have for what the education we want to deliver. But I have to leave it to you to make that decision as to whether it's a good idea or not in the main.
I think it's an important point that you made just a moment ago about the idea of children developing an interest in these subjects over time, because and Sal mentioned this as well, that it's the idea that you have to cater to children's existing interests when that they may not have a broad range of interests, and that's something that schools should address by trying to encourage children to develop interests in new things rather than just constantly talking and thinking about the things that they already know from TV or whatever.
From when I was at school, your teachers play a big part in whether you're going to achieve or whether you're going to do badly. So you say that you're going to invest in specialist teachers, but it's not just about how well, because you could be the greatest teacher and have the most knowledge on science or biology or, history, but the way you interact with the children, how are you going to make sure that happens?
There's some good questions here. The point you're making about how we guarantee that our teachers will get the best out of pupils, I think is a difficult one to take, because you have to be careful that you don't say that we go down to the level of the child to find where the child is at and to connect with them, relevant way we talk to them, mimic the way that children talk to each other, to be able to communicate with them. I think it's absolutely the opposite. Mm-hmm. What you have to do is take yourself seriously in the role of a teacher, say that this is what we think you need to know. And therefore, by taking yourself seriously, it's no surprise then that children take you seriously. And I think this is kind of a fundamental mistake about how young people respond to adults. Adults need to set the lead, and then children have something to argue with, follow, or reject. And the simple thing is that most of them, when they see you take it seriously, they'll follow you and they'll walk the walk with you. We want to do IGCSEs, not GCSEs. And I've spent quite a lot of time critiquing the current GCSE model that exists in the state schools, which is dominated by interference with the general idea of studying a subject, so that it's laden with all sorts of other demands upon it. Just a very simple one, coursework. Coursework is meant to test people in ways that are not like an exam, but to my way of thinking, what's actually happened is it's a complete farce. The whole thing is a farce. So it's worth up to 33% of GCSEs at the moment, and it's essentially organised cheating, because the kid doesn't do it. The teacher does it with the kid, or the kid gets help from the teacher. They go home, they get help from their parents. Who does it? It's not a test. So it's a kind of exercise in filling in something. And it doesn't really add anything to a child's education. So we want to strip that out, get it down to just a core basic exam at the end of 2 years or 3 years, the equivalent of the GCSE, that's concentrating on the subject knowledge. And that gives us at least something to then go forward with, rather than any other concerns that are brought into it. So I do take that from the private sector.
Dave, do you think that vocational subjects like woodwork have a place if they're part of a broad curriculum?
What you're doing does seem really quite inspiring, but do you think that on a national level, educational standards will be raised by perhaps another 3,000 of yourself?
And I'm just wondering, how free exactly would your free school be? Because I'm just thinking, wouldn't the government be part of it somehow or another?
And Rossa just mentioned vocational subjects. Work skills seem to be put into a lot of lessons these days, and I just think, part of me thinks it's just a shame, a kind of reduction of childhood, to have this kind of, this idea that it's all one thing from school to work, it's just all work. And I think a lot of children would just find that really boring, and it would be a shame not to have, a childhood with school where you learn interesting things like history and science, which might not necessarily be, really useful in the field of work that you eventually go into, but at least you've had that, childhood, I suppose.
I think the practical stuff, you mentioned woodwork, is really, really important, and it's actually one of the sort of cornerstones of the school, is that we want to give every child a very, very good academic education coupled with a practical education, which we're focusing as an example on the technical side, especially around computer sciences, electronics, programming, that kind of thing, because we have got a passion for delivering that as well. We want every child to get that, so that, if you like, every child makes something as well as learns something. Because what goes for vocational education or practical or skills-based education today isn't It's like paper that you tick off. I have done this skill, that skill, the other skill. You haven't really done it. You just ticked it off. Whereas what we'd really like them to do is to actually make something and get a bit of a passion for actually making something and seeing it through from start to finish. And so we're really, really keen to do that. So we're going to have a very coherent structure of the school day, which is in the morning, 4 hours of solid teaching, academic teaching. But in the afternoon, after lunch, we go practical, and the technical aspect of it, the workshop aspect of it, comes in then alongside other stuff that we do as well. How free are we? Right, okay. Yeah, that's a very good question. Yes, we will have to abide by the rules set down by Ofsted in terms of what we do in terms of how we're assessed as a school fit for purpose. In the first instance, Ofsted have to assess us before we open. I think at the moment we've got a 2-year grace before we get inspected. That may change at any moment. Yes, that could be a difficult process. So on that score, we're not free. Okay? But on the other hand, what we do have is the ability to set the curriculum how we want to do it, literally. And as long as we deliver what is called a broad and balanced curriculum, which I've tried to explain, then we can do it any way we wish. And in that sense, we are freed up completely. And we can use whatever qualifications we wish or not, if we so choose.
Can I just ask, because you've mentioned, obviously the school's focus on science, and you just mentioned computer programming and so on. I'm just wondering if kids who are born in that catchment area who are very naturally talented in art or music and stuff, would they have an equal chance to flourish in the school, or do you believe that schools have to be in some way specialised to be successful academically? Is that just the reality of it?
It may or may not be. I mean, we will deliver art, but the way we would say we would deliver art is we want a very, very good art teacher to do that. And if that gets youngsters to flourish in the arts, then it's up to us to provide the ability then for them to go beyond that into post-16. But we have to be honest that the way we're doing this is by focusing on science, because that's where my passion has come from in terms of delivering what we're doing. And that's where you're going to get most out of our school. But that's not to say you won't get it in some other ways as well. So, and other schools, why not set up one that's a specialist in history or humanities or the arts? I have no problem with that.
I was wondering how the examinations would work, because at the moment in the current system it seems that it's very much sort of ticking boxes. You've got your keywords in there, so you've got the answer right, as opposed to actually a knowledge-based examination system. I was wondering how you would address that.
Okay, well, not being on the examining boards, I can't change them from the position I'm in, although I have been involved in arguments around this. I worked on a commission before the present government got in, Richard Sykes Commission, which was looking at schools' examinations, and a big argument around that and the decline in standards and so on. So in some senses that argument is working its way through, and it is having an effect. So GCSEs are going to go linear shortly. That's a government-led thing. There's no modules, in other words, so it's not broken up into bits. It will be after the 2 or 3 years that you spend doing it. Same thing's going to happen to A-levels, and there's a big commission going on about how to structure them and so on. So in other words, that argument, we're part of it by dint of the fact that I argue about it and so on, but I can't control it. There's no way I can do that, and I don't pretend I'm going to set up an exam board.
You said that you wanted to scrap coursework, and then I was just thinking, in my opinion, I think coursework's much better than exams, because exams nowadays are all about box ticking, and even going back to when I took my GCSEs, I remember the science exam was multiple choice, so it was A, B or C, and it was literally a memory game to pass your GCSEs. And whereas with my coursework, I found that coursework's more focused on knowledge and you understanding the subject and having an opinion and getting more knowledge, because you have to do outside reading and look at external sources, whereas with exams you just have to know what they want you to know.
A lot of people are very nervous doing exams, and that really blocks them into giving their fullest in an exam. I have a friend, I mean, I don't have problems with exams, but I actually have a friend, she goes into exams, she's very cultured, she studies, she knows her things, but she just gets so nervous. She literally can't put it out, and that's what she's going to be judged on. Not somebody talking to her and see what knowledge she has, not a coursework that she had time to think about and structure. She's just going to be judged on that. And I don't know, it could be some kid had a bad day, parents were fighting, I don't know, goes into the exam, they can't change the date, they have to do it there, and it just goes wrong, and it completely, you know, their grades are affected by that, and they don't get another chance. And the other thing about the coursework, you're saying you're blocking it because you don't think that kids do it, that the parents end up doing it, the teacher does it for them. It seems to me you're not giving trust to students, you're not trusting them, you're assuming they don't want to learn and that they'll go the easiest way to get the parents to do it or everybody else to do it. I would morally feel guilty about giving in something I didn't do for myself, but I think that's something that probably should have been encouraged in the system, that they're there to learn something from themselves and not just to pass. If your school is so innovative and it seems like a really good project, maybe you should stimulate that.
From what you said so far, I can see some positive side of what you, the free school you're proposing. How can the members of the public be part of this project towards success of what you're trying to execute?
Okay, I just must have a go at this coursework thing, because I think you put a very good case for actually, you know, sort of doing education the way it should be done, and giving youngsters a chance to really express themselves in terms of their passion for learning and so on. But that's not what coursework is, and what it's become. And there are various aspects of the education system like this. Okay, so you yourself might take it very seriously and so on. But in terms of the way that we run education, it's become a real problem, because the assumption is that everybody gets all of it. Right? So therefore, if you do coursework, if you don't get 100% at it, why not? And so the demand then starts, pressure starts building up from both the school, parents, pupils, everybody. Why aren't you getting more out of it? And when you are working in a system which is driven by targets, the pressure is quite horrendous on that level, and it mitigates against the sense that you gave, you know, in terms of the work you would do. So from my point of view, I want to free us from that problem by not making that a part of the education that is sort of driven by the target motivation that schools are under. But that doesn't mean we don't do it. That doesn't mean we don't inspire youngsters to do project work themselves, to take themselves seriously. So we're very keen. My vice principal, who we hope will be our vice principal, is really keen on essays. So he wants the youngsters to learn how to write essays and to really push that side of things. That's not an exam. That's not going to be examined. That's what we want to do. And therefore there's a difference. So when there's that crossover between these two things, you've got a problem, because then it becomes something that people want to measure, then the pressure on it is quite horrendous. And I'm saying that at the present moment in the state system, that has failed. The system almost acknowledges that. They've had to change the criteria on which people do the coursework now, so that it is supposedly done under controlled conditions because of that problem of it not being done in the room by the child and so on. So getting away from that, freeing us to do the education we want to do, but the examination system, that's a different question. There I very simply think that, yes, it is all or nothing examination, and yes, you could fluff it, right? But that's pressure, and the argument you're sort of in danger of making is that we don't work well under pressure. Whereas what I think is that for young people, it's actually the opposite. The pressure is what drives you to work well. And you don't like it, you might react against it, but you put that pressure on someone and you get the best out of them. And if they're going to capitulate, that tells you something about them, okay? And it might not be what you want them to do, but it tells you something about them. And then you have to deal with it in some way. And then the other simple point is, if you do mess up your academic education, it's not the end of the world. It's not the end of your life. It's not that something you can't do something about and go in a different direction. But it might tell you that's not what you should be doing, because it's not you. And so you do learn something from it. Failure teaches you something, okay? And that's a difficult thing, because we're not meant to have anybody fail. And that's, again, part of this problem, trying to find ways to fudge it so that nobody fails. I don't believe in that. I believe that we set really rigorous demands of young people and see what they can do, find out what they're capable of, and then they'll have learned something, and so will we. And just in terms of what could anybody do to support the project, we're open to working with people on all sorts of different projects, because this is an opportunity to try things out, to experiment in that respect, and therefore I welcome anybody who's interested in the project and would like to get involved. Get in touch, let us know.
Because it sounds like such a great idea, and hearing you talk about it, of course, it makes so much sense. I don't see how people could disagree with your ideas that you're putting forward. And so what do you think is the biggest obstacle to schools like these, and the biggest reason that more people aren't doing this?
Well, that's a very good question. The process of putting this together has been torturous, right? Because we're doing this whilst running our normal lives and our normal jobs. And there is no leeway on this. There's no pot of gold to do it with. There's nothing, okay? We've had not a penny to help us do it. So it's put quite a strain on us doing it. But we found out that we really want to do it. And some people might start off and think they want to do it and find out, oh, that's too much, not for me. So in a sense, you can understand why that's done, because the government doesn't want to hand over effectively millions of pounds to people who don't really mean it. But it's a bit of an ask. But then it's like setting up any organisation. You don't want to go into it with a sort of false idea of what you're doing. You want to go into it knowing this is going to be tough, it's going to put us under pressure, and when we do it, we're running effectively a small business, or maybe more than that. And that's what you've got to be prepared to do. But along the way, you're going to get a heck of a lot out of it. And if we don't succeed, we'll have learnt an awful lot from it, and we'll know what is and isn't possible, and that hopefully will help somebody else try it as well.
Well, I just wanted to see what your thoughts were on teachers' freedom, because there's been a lot of talk recently that there's been a lack of freedom for teachers to kind of speak out and be critical of the curriculum and education right now. I was just wondering if you think maybe the introduction of more free schools will allow them to have a bigger voice, so to speak.
Some critics have underlined that private businesses may seek to profit out of education via free schools. Do you agree that this is a danger?
I think kind of state comprehensives have good reason to be worried, because the state has a habit of just screwing everything up, and that I think they're probably right to feel threatened by, like, to hand over the education of your children. Like, that is a big thing, and I think almost everybody would prefer to hand it over to a school run by a group of passionate teachers rather than the state itself.
I think what you're doing and what you're trying to set up is absolutely brilliant, very inspirational, and to be honest, I feel a little bit jealous of the young kids who are going to get to go there. I'd like to have gone there myself, and I think what's really good about it is just the fact that it gives academic subjects and all of that, a particular higher position, because even with things like history and the whole specialization in schools where, you teach Tudors and Stuarts, Nazi Germany, slavery, and that's it, no kind of understanding of context or how we came to this and that kind of stuff. So, in that sense, I'm really excited about what you're trying to set up.
Yeah, I must say you've convinced me too. I wasn't too sure about free schools. I hadn't heard about them before, but you probably convinced me a bit about them. But I just have one question. Do you encourage the continuation of free schools being open and creative and people having the choice of creating their own independent learning system, or do you want this to be a proof that your system works in hopefully becoming a nationwide thing to get to a level where everybody has the same standard of education?
My only kind of problem with the whole idea of your free school is the fact I think you're kind of underrating the parental influence on a child's success and a child's ability to take in the knowledge that your school wants to give to each pupil.
I think you're right that parents do influence their own children. There's no doubt about it, and we recognise that, and we want to sort of talk to our parents. Definitely, we want to see who the children are. We're getting to, in our first cohort, talk to their parents, find out about them, if they've got problems, work them out, and then deal with it. So our system is based on the idea that if there is a problem, we overcome it so that every child gets access to the curriculum that we want to deliver. That's our motivation, and hopefully that'll iron out some, maybe not all, but some of the problems that youngsters have, and give them that opportunity, because that's really what it's about. It's giving an opportunity to anybody in the East End, you know, who wants an education, to have it. I mean, that, from my point of view, goes right back to the beginning, the history of education when it emerged, which, you know, largely started in the East End of London in the first place, mass education. And it was that idea of, you know, you can reform the system and give people a stake in it by giving them an education that drove it in the first place. And in a sense, we're going back to that and experimenting with a way of seeing how far we can take it. And yet I don't think it's been done before. So it's both going back and going forwards at the same time. One of our values in our mission statement is that we would judge ourselves by the impact our pupils have on the world. And I think, so we'll know. So if they go and do something, we'll know, and then we've been a success. If they don't, then, you know, pretty much we haven't. So time will tell. Teachers' freedom is quite an interesting one. Obviously, being the person who's going to be in charge of this school, I'm kind of going on the other side of the fence in this respect. So I don't want to give them too much freedom. But then again, what I want them to have is the freedom to teach. And that's crucial. So if they have got a subject they're passionate about, I want them to be free to find a way of teaching that, but to be accountable for what they've done. So it's not just they teach it, but they've got to make sure that the youngsters are prepared as best we can. So when it comes to the examination, which, as we've said, is the one day and it's all done, that they're in the best situation to do really well at it. And I know we can do that, and that's my own experience. I've been asked about private businesses and the influence they'll have, and you know, it's true that the private businesses are getting a footing in education through this project, but you know, it could collapse into basically being run in large numbers of schools being run by conglomerates of private businesses. Okay, and that's not something I particularly want at all, because I don't think their motivations are the same as mine. But if it succeeds and we get a few really good schools out of it that can act as models, then that's what, as I've already said, that's the point which I would say I support this project. No, it doesn't mean that I want all schools to end up like mine. I mean, I would hate that, to be honest with you, because, I mean, I know I'm a particular person, I have a particular way of doing things, and that's not the same as everybody else, and you either like it or you don't, right? So parents, in the end, you can say, no, right, I don't want that. But then again, somebody else might come at it from a completely different way and inspire someone else and inspire a whole, you know, generation of other youngsters in a particular different direction. So in that sense, I think it's the idea that you're open to trying things out, the experimentation that is crucial to it. And I'll just come back in the end to say that, you know, if there's one way that I would see that we've succeeded is that we have provided the opportunity for kids from the East End who at the moment don't get it. They do not get the opportunity to study the sciences at top universities. Just keep it that simple, right? Everything else comes with it, right? But if we achieve that, then we have changed it. We have changed what exists there. Because at the moment, in my current school in Tooting, teach more pupils than there are in Tower Hamlets and Newham put together A-level physics. So if I just replicate what I've done there, never mind anything else, I've changed it. Right? And so that way we can say we have really achieved something.
Well, I'm afraid that's all we have time for. Just want to say thank you to David for a really, really inspiring and illuminating discussion. If you'd like to show your support for the East London Science School, get in touch with David through the website www.eastlondonscienceschool.co.uk. We look forward to hearing your comments on our website.